When my son walked into the room holding his father's phone, my heart stopped. He had an innocent look in his eyes, but in his hands he held something I wasn't prepared to see. "Mom, look what I accidentally found," he said, holding out the device. The messages were open, as if screaming at me. The name on the screen was all too familiar. His godmother. My body trembled, but I tried to hide it in front of him. The sentences were intimate, laden with secrets and innuendo. Heart emojis, promises of hidden meetings, and nicknames that should never have been there. Each line felt like a slap in the face. The betrayal wasn't just to me, it was also to my son's trust. I took a deep breath, trying to swallow the avalanche of emotions. That moment changed everything inside me. There was no going back, no more room for excuses. I still didn't know how to react, but one thing was clear. My life would never be the same after that discovery. I looked at the phone in my son's hands and felt the world spin. The words they exchanged left no room for doubt. It was intimate, complicit, and completely unacceptable. I smiled at him, trying to hide the pain, and simply said, "Thank you, son. You can leave it to me." Deep down, my soul screamed. I spent the rest of the day in silence, digesting every word I'd seen. I feigned normalcy, as if nothing had happened. I made dinner, washed the dishes, laughed at the silly jokes on TV. But inside me an open wound throbbed with every passing second. His face made me nauseous. That night when he arrived, he acted as if everything was fine. A kiss on the forehead, a "how was your day?" and his cell phone already slipped into his pocket. I watched his every move. The trust I'd once had in him was gone. In its place there was only vigilance. I lay beside him, but I couldn't sleep. I listened to his heavy breathing, while remembering the words he'd exchanged with his godmother. "You make me feel alive again." That phrase consumed me inside. How could he use that tone with someone else? The following days were a cruel test. I had to act calmly, without arousing suspicion. I continued my routine as a devoted wife, but inside every detail was being recorded. The forgotten towel, the different perfume, the long showers. Everything was evident. I began to observe his behavior more closely. When his phone vibrated, he disguised it. When I entered the room, he quickly closed the screen. The sparkle in his eyes was no longer for me. It was as if he were living two parallel lives. I decided not to ask anything at that moment. If I confronted him too soon, he would deny it. I already knew his stock phrases. "You're reading things where there isn't anything." I needed more. I needed something undeniable. I knew that the truth always gives itself away. My son, without realizing it, became a key player. He didn't quite understand what he had read, but he sensed something was wrong. He watched me with the look of someone who wanted to help. I sensed his silent concern. He was my support without even knowing it. One night, while he was showering, I left my phone charging in the living room. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't resist. I discreetly opened it and saw the deleted history. He was careful. But technology doesn't always obey. On the Uber icon, the location was still there. An unknown address appeared repeatedly. Always on the same days of the week, always at the same time. It wasn't work, it wasn't the gym. It was something secret. My heart was beating fast, my hands were sweating. The truth was getting closer. I decided to write everything down. I made a notebook with dates, times, and details. I turned my pain into an investigation. If he thought I was distracted, he was wrong. I was more alert than ever. I became a spy inside my own home. Cooking, I remembered the laughs he'd give while texting. Washing the dishes, I remembered the sparkle in his eyes when he'd text someone back. Deep down, I already knew what was happening, but I needed to see it with my own eyes to believe it. One afternoon, while tidying my room, I smelled a strong perfume on his shirt. It wasn't mine. It wasn't what I usually wore. It was sweet, cloying, and clung to the fabric. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and thought, how many times had he come home like this? I decided I wouldn't be a silent victim anymore. I needed to prepare myself, not just emotionally, but also strategically. The confrontation couldn't just be a rant. It had to be precise, with evidence, so he couldn't deny it. That night he left, saying he was meeting friends. I waited, looked at my watch, and let calm take over. I grabbed my phone and checked the Uber tracking. The address was there once again. The truth was slowly revealing itself. The hours passed and I sat motionless on the couch, waiting. When he returned, he had a look of satisfaction in his eyes. It was great. I needed it. I smiled on the outside, but inside my mind was recording every detail. He had no idea what I already knew. My son, watching, innocently asked, "Mom, Dad's acting strange, isn't he?" I just stroked his hair and said, "It's okay, my love." But it wasn't. It was impossible to hide the storm that was already ready to explode inside me. The next day I took advantage of the fact that he left his smartwatch charging. I quickly scrolled through the notifications. And there were saved messages, small snippets that hadn't been deleted. "I miss yesterday. I want to repeat it soon." Each word cut me to the core. I needed to remain calm, but my hands were shaking. I wasn't the same woman I'd been before. The naivete was gone. Now I was an investigator in my own life, and each clue led me closer to the inevitable. I walked around the house thinking about how betrayal slowly erodes. It's not just about sex or intimacy. It's about trust, about broken promises, about years of partnership thrown away. The weight of it all weighed on my shoulders. He looked at me at breakfast and said, "You're acting strangely. Is everything okay?" I almost choked on my coffee. I wanted to scream in his face, I wanted to throw everything on the table, but I held on tight and simply replied, "I'm just tired, that's all." My silence was my shield. I began to observe my godmother too. She had always seemed close, always present at family events. Wide smiles, long hugs. Now everything made sense. The excessive affection wasn't innocent. It was a disguise. It was provocation. At the last family barbecue, I noticed the exchanged glances, discreet, yet intense. It was like watching a play where everyone believed except me. I wanted to rip off their masks right then and there. But I held on. The right time would come. Meanwhile, my nights were long and sleepless. With every suspicious message, every detail, my mind created scenarios. I imagined the two of them together, laughing at my naivete. The pain was unbearable, but it also fueled my determination. I began to avoid physical contact with him. Cold kisses, brief hugs, superficial conversations. He sensed the distance but didn't dare ask. Maybe he knew something was wrong. Maybe he was just waiting for me to explode first. One morning, as I got into my car, I saw a crumpled receipt in the glove compartment. It was from a restaurant. 2 meals, expensive wine, the day he said he was in a meeting. I kept the paper with me, like another piece in my collection of evidence. My mind was no longer the same. I, who had believed in promises and glances, now believed in evidence. Every detail was a brick in the wall I'd built against him. I no longer loved him the same way. I just watched him. A part of me still wanted to believe I'd been wrong, that it was all just a misunderstanding. But the facts were too harsh. The evidence was too much. It was no longer a matter of intuition. It was reality, and I needed to face it head-on. I sensed the confrontation was coming. I couldn't put it off forever. I knew there was no going back, that what I was about to do would change everything. But I also knew I didn't deserve to live with lies, and sooner or later, he would have to face the truth. And that's when I found something that made me tremble even more. An audio saved on my phone, forgotten in the recordings folder. Her voice, laughing, calling him my love. I didn't need anything else. But I still had no idea the impact it would have on the whole family. I'd listened to that audio over 20 times. Her laugh, so intimate, seemed to mock me. The way she called him my love felt like a knife stab. I couldn't understand how he had the nerve to save that on his phone. It was as if he wanted to be discovered. As I cooked, my mind wandered. Every pot I stirred brought back memories of family dinners, birthday toasts, conversations between them that once seemed innocent. Now, every detail took on new meaning. I began to feel disgusted by everything. He continued to act as if nothing was happening. He'd come home with smiles, ask me about my day, and lie beside me as if he were still my real husband. But I no longer saw a partner. I saw a stranger, an enemy within my own home. The late nights were worse. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail. My mind wouldn't shut off. I thought about the past, about plans for the future, and how everything had been built on a lie. It was impossible not to feel revolted. At work, I began to lose focus. My colleagues noticed my silence, but I didn't want to speak. I didn't want to reveal what was happening until I was sure what to do. I kept everything to myself, waiting for the right moment. My life became a game of patience. My son, unknowingly, became increasingly attentive. He watched me carefully, as if sensing something wasn't right. He asked if I was happy, if I needed anything. I responded with a forced smile, but deep down I knew he noticed more than I realized. I decided I couldn't let my emotions get the better of me. I began to act coolly. I observed schedules, expenses, routes. I downloaded copies of receipts, took photos of them. I built a silent archive of his double life. Each page was a wound, but also a weapon. That weekend, we were invited to a family birthday party. There she was, the godmother, with the same smile as always. She hugged me as if nothing had happened. The scent of her perfume was the same as the one I'd found on his shirt. My stomach churned. During the party I remained silent, simply observing. I saw the glances, the quick exchanges of gestures, the hidden complicity. It was as if I'd put on a different lens. Everything that had previously gone unnoticed was now all too clear. They couldn't hide it from me. On the way home, he put his hand on my shoulder and asked, "Is everything okay?" I simply replied, "Sure, just tired." Anger burned inside me. He was beside me, but mentally elsewhere, and I knew exactly where. The days dragged on with this routine of silence and observation. I was no longer the same woman. I'd become cold, calculating. I no longer believed in promises, only in facts. And the facts screamed in my face. He was no longer worthy of my love. I decided I needed to see it for myself. Digital evidence was powerful, but nothing compared to the impact of witnessing it. I planned every detail. I waited for the moment he would arrange a meeting with her, and I would be ready. The tables were turning. He left, saying he had a meeting that evening, but I already knew the truth. I waited a few minutes, gathered my things, and followed the location. My heart pounded like never before. Every mile I traveled was a mixture of pain and courage. I was about to face the inevitable. I approached the Uber address. It was a discreet restaurant, far from the city center. I parked a little way away and watched. There they were, walking in together, laughing like a real couple. That image will never leave my mind. I could have gone in and made a scene, but I decided to wait. I watched from the window, writing everything down, discreetly recording. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. I needed to make sure he could never deny what he did. I returned home with my heart in pieces, but with a clear mind. I had seen it, I had proof. Now it was no longer a supposition, it was reality. The betrayal wasn't just on my phone, it was right before my eyes. The truth was cruel, but liberating. That night, I lay beside him once more. He was exhausted, snoring heavily. I looked at that face as if it were the first time I'd seen it. There was no love, no affection. There was only contempt. He was no longer my husband, just a mediocre actor. My head was spinning with possibilities. Tell my family? Confront him alone? Keep quiet and plan my exit? Each option weighed differently. But one thing I knew, I wouldn't stand still. Something had to be done. At breakfast the next morning, I looked at him and said, "Do you have something to tell me?" He laughed, changed the subject, and then smiled. I just smiled. It was amazing how he underestimated my intelligence. He thought he was still fooling me. I continued with the routine. I tidied the house, took care of my son, went to the grocery store. But inside every second was a rehearsal for the confrontation. I knew there would soon be no hiding. The moment was getting closer and closer. I noticed he was becoming more nervous. Perhaps he sensed something was wrong. The way he looked at his phone, the way he watched me silently, revealed insecurity. He suspected I knew, and this only further confirmed his guilt. One day, while sorting through the clothes in the closet, I found a small box hidden among the shirts. Inside was a piece of jewelry. It wasn't meant for me. I'd never seen it before. It was further proof, another sign that the betrayal had already taken up too much space. I put the jewelry back in the same place, as if I hadn't seen it. I wanted him to think he was still safe. The element of surprise was my strongest weapon. I had patience. He had no idea of the storm I was preparing. I began to imagine the impact of everything when it came to light. His family would find out, his friends would talk, his mask would slip. I wanted him to feel the humiliation he'd made me endure in silence, and the right time was coming. The hardest part was maintaining my composure in front of my son. I needed to protect him from that pain. I didn't want him to suffer any more than he already had by showing me the messages. He didn't deserve to carry that burden. I would have to be strong for both of us. That week, he'd said he was traveling for work. But the Uber route revealed a different story. He wasn't traveling. He was staying at a hotel in the same city. That made me decide. I would go there. I needed to see for myself. I arrived at the hotel and sat in the car for a few minutes. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding. I saw his name on the guest list. The godmother walked in shortly after. The scene was clear, naked, and raw. They had no shame. I recorded everything discreetly. The video was short, but sufficient. Here was the definitive confirmation. There was no denying it. He had chosen to live a lie and destroy our story. Now it was my turn to choose how to react. I returned home in silence. I went inside and prepared dinner as if nothing had happened. He would be home soon, tired, full of excuses. But I was in no rush. I had something far more valuable, the truth. And it was all in my hands. And as I chopped the vegetables, a certainty struck me like never before. I was no longer the woman who accepted crumbs. I was no longer the naive wife. I was someone about to turn the tables. And when that happened, no one would forget. He came home late, straightening his tie as if he'd just returned from a meeting. The smell of alcohol betrayed that he'd been drinking, but not with me. I sat at the table and feigned normality, placing the plate before him. The silence between us was heavy. He had no idea I'd already seen everything. As he ate, I took in every detail. His fingers swiping on his phone, his quick glances at the screen, his slight smile when a notification arrived. I already knew who was on the other end. His every reaction was poorly rehearsed theater, and I had a front row seat. That night, when we went to bed, I stayed awake. He lay down, turned over, and quickly fell asleep. I stared at him in the dark, remembering the image of him entering the hotel with her. The betrayal was no longer a ghost. It was real, tangible, recorded. The next day, when he left for work, he forgot his smartwatch again. I took advantage of it. Among the notifications were alarms set with strange names. One of them said, "Remind. Date." I smiled to myself because it was already bordering on the absurd. I began to realize how everyday life hid glaring details. The clothes smelling differently, the illogical excuses, the inconsistent schedules. But the cruelest thing was how naturally he lied, as if loyalty were just a joke. My son asked why his father was rarely home. He made excuses to protect him. I said it was work, that I'd have more time soon. But inside me, anger grew. He wasn't just deceiving me. He was deceiving his own son. One morning, when I went to the grocery store, I found his car parked in an odd spot. He'd said he was in a meeting, but there it was, parked near a discreet cafe. I didn't go in. I just registered it mentally. With each passing day, his mask slipped further. I became an expert at hiding emotions. I smiled at dinners, responded to messages, made family plans. But inside I was already in a different state. It wasn't about doubt anymore. It was about strategy. I was waiting for the perfect moment to act. He began to notice my silence. "You've been distant. Has something happened?" I looked him in the eye and said, "Nothing. Just tired." The truth was stuck in my throat, but I wouldn't let it go. I let the fear of being discovered slowly erode him. At work, I found myself staring into space, remembering every detail. My colleagues noticed my lack of energy. One of them asked, "Is everything okay at home?" I smiled and replied, "Everything's great." Lying became routine, but it was the only way to stay calm. Over the weekend, we went to the mall as a family. He pretended to be there, but his phone vibrated constantly. I discreetly watched the screen's reflection in the shop windows. It was her name that appeared. It hurt, but it also confirmed everything. I began to notice the expenses on the card, purchases in places that weren't part of our routine. Expensive restaurants, discreet motels, gifts that never arrived. Everything there, coldly recorded on the statement. Each line was a silent confession. One rainy night, he came home later than usual. Dirty, exhausted, but smiling. He said the meeting had been tiring. I just nodded. Inside, I wondered where he'd really been. The rain outside seemed to wash away my last illusions. I began storing all the details in a secret folder. Printouts, receipts, audio, videos. It was my silent arsenal. I didn't yet know how I would use it, but I knew the time would come. It was only a matter of time. And when it did, it would be devastating. I began to feel a strange sense of power. The more evidence I had, the calmer I became. He thought he was in control, but he didn't realize I already knew everything. Silence, which had previously been pain, became my greatest weapon. My routine changed. I did my chores as usual, but now everything had a different weight. Every breakfast, every family dinner was a performance. I was no longer a wife, I was an observer. And he wasn't a husband, just a defendant awaiting trial. The hardest part was dealing with his godmother. She continued to visit the family, always smiling, always helpful. But I saw in her eyes the confidence of someone who believed she would never be caught. This gave me strength, because I knew the end was near. My son would occasionally ask, "Mom, are you sad?" I would say no, that I was just tired. But he knew, children sense it. I saw the same distrust in his eyes that I felt. He sensed something was wrong. At my mother-in-law's birthday, they were there, together, as always. They laughed, toasted, exchanged discreet glances. I stood firm, observing every gesture, every detail. They had no idea I already had all the pieces to the puzzle. When I got home, I sat on the couch and stared into the void. I thought about all the years we spent together, the plans we made, the dreams we shared. Everything was crumbling before my eyes. But instead of destroying me, it strengthened me. I realized it wasn't just about him. It was about me. About how much I had forgotten myself over the years, believing empty promises. The betrayal hurt me, but it also awakened me. I was no longer the same, and never would be again. He continued to lie with the utmost ease. "I'm going to bed early today. I'm tired." Minutes later, my cell phone vibrated under my pillow. I pretended to sleep, but I heard everything. With each message, he dug himself deeper into the ground. One afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. It was the hotel. They asked if I could confirm the reservation in his name. I remained silent, listening to every word. I coldly confirmed and hung up. That was the final push. I no longer needed anything. That night, I looked at him and felt a mixture of anger and pity. Anger for everything he'd done. Pity for not realizing it was already over. He continued living his lie, thinking he was safe. Little did he know the end was knocking at the door. I began to plan more clearly. It was no longer about impulsive confrontation. It was about exposure, about showing everyone who he really was. I wanted the truth to be seen not only by me, but by everyone who believed in our family. I began to mentally organize how I would do it, where, when, how. Every detail needed to be perfect. I wanted him to feel the same shock I felt when I saw those messages. I wanted the world to crumble around him. My days became preparation. With each piece of evidence I gathered, with each detail I observed, I felt the moment approaching. There was no longer room for doubt. He was about to face the weight of his own lie. And one silent night, as I watched him sleep beside me, I realized something. I was no longer afraid. Pain had turned to strength. And strength was about to transform into action. His downfall was inevitable. That morning, I woke earlier than he did. I simply watched him sleep soundly, oblivious to the storm raging within me. His serene face contrasted with the double life I already knew. It was strange to think that this man, with whom I had shared so many years, was now nothing but a lie. I got up, made coffee, and sat alone at the table. The smell of fresh bread mixed with hot coffee brought back memories. How many times had we repeated this same scene? But now, everything seemed empty. I chewed slowly, as if swallowing were an effort. When he appeared, still drowsy, he pulled out a chair and tried to be affectionate. A kiss on the forehead, a forced smile as if trying to maintain the role of good husband. I watched him, but inside I felt nothing. I just waited for the next slip-up. His phone vibrated on the table. He tried to hide it, turning the screen down, but it didn't go unnoticed. I said nothing. I just stared in silence, and perhaps he felt my heavy gaze. The lie was slipping through his hands. That same day, I reviewed the files I'd been collecting. Photos, audio recordings, receipts. The folder was complete, almost ready to use. It was as if I had a dossier on his secret life, and each piece of evidence was a piece of my broken heart. At work, people laughed, made weekend plans. I silently thought about how simple their lives seemed. Meanwhile, I carried the weight of a discovery that could destroy everything at once. But I didn't want to destroy myself with it. On the way home, I passed my godmother. She smiled, waved from afar, and pretended everything was normal. My blood boiled in my veins. I wanted to cross the street and tell her everything, but I held back. She didn't deserve to see my weakness. When I arrived, I found my son on the couch. He hugged me tightly, as if he knew I needed it. This gesture gave me strength. I couldn't fall, couldn't show weakness. It was for him that I would resist. It was for him that I needed to be strategic. That night, he left again, saying he was going to take care of something. I looked into his eyes and just nodded. I knew exactly where he would be. Minutes later, I saw it on the Uber app, hotel, once again. My heart pounded, but it was no longer a surprise. I got in the car and drove to the place. I parked far away and watched. There they were, walking in as if they were a legitimate couple. I saw them holding hands, laughing. I recorded every detail, every movement with my phone. The truth was recorded with no chance of going back. I returned home before him, sat on the couch, and waited. He arrived late, smelling of sweet perfume on his coat. He said he was tired. I smiled coldly and asked, "Would you like some tea?" He accepted, unaware that every gesture was scrutinized. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, feeling my heart pound with hatred and sadness. I thought about everything we'd built together, all the wasted years. It was as if my life had been hijacked by the lie. The next day, during family lunch, the godmother appeared again. She sat next to me, as always. She smiled, complimented my dish, joked with my son. I just stared at her silently, as if studying an enemy. She had no idea I already knew. Perhaps she thought she was safe, that the messages and meetings were invisible. But I was seeing everything. I was the silent witness to a betrayal that would soon explode. My son, halfway through the meal, commented, "Dad, you spend too much time on your phone." He laughed, changed the subject, said it was work. I swallowed hard. The naturalness of the lie revolted me. Even in front of his son, he didn't hesitate to pretend. Later, while he was showering, I grabbed his coat and smelled his perfume again. It was the same as his godmother's. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and almost cried. But I held back. The pain was turning into fuel. I wouldn't give in. I began to avoid physical contact. He tried to hug me, and I dodged. He found it strange but didn't ask. Maybe he was afraid of the answer. The distance between us only grew, but he continued to pretend everything was fine. The nights were long. I found myself tossing and turning, mentally planning what the exposure would be like. I imagined his reaction, the look of shock, the mask slipping in front of everyone. This scene gave me the strength to stay strong. One morning, my son came into the room and asked, "Mommy, are you upset about Daddy?" My heart sank. I smiled and said, "No, my love, everything's fine." But inside, his question cut me to the quick. He could already feel it, even if he didn't understand. I decided I couldn't hide it forever. The confrontation was getting closer. I didn't just want to free myself, I wanted to show everyone who he really was. He needed to feel the weight of what he'd done. At dinner, I noticed he avoided looking at me. He fiddled with his plate, his phone, anything. The silence was awkward. I almost said it right then and there, but I took a deep breath and held it in. It wouldn't be like that. I wanted it to be memorable, unforgettable. The following week, an unexpected message appeared on his phone. I saw the reflection on the screen. "I miss you." It was from her. He deleted it quickly, but too late. I'd already seen it. It was like confirmation before my eyes. My heart raced, but I didn't tremble. It was no longer pain, it was strength. I realized I was ready. There was no more room for doubt. It was time to start turning the tables. I began planning where I would make the revelation. I needed a setting where he wouldn't have an escape, a place where important people were present, where he couldn't deny it. My brother-in-law's birthday seemed perfect. The whole family would be together. I spent the next few days in silence, but a flame grew within me. With each piece of evidence stored away, with each painful memory, I felt myself growing stronger. I was no longer the victim. I was the author of the outcome. He continued living his routine of lies, unaware of what lay ahead. I smiled silently, waiting for the right moment. The theater was set, and he would be the protagonist of his own downfall. And as I organized every detail in my mind, I realized something. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. It was about the woman I had become. And when the time came, there would be no turning back. My brother-in-law's birthday was approaching, and I already knew it would be the stage for the truth. I spent the previous days with a strange calm, as if I were rehearsing every gesture, every word. He, distracted, continued to act as if everything was under control. Little did I know what awaited him. The day before the party, I reviewed my evidence once more. Printouts, audios, receipts, videos, everything was organized in a folder on my phone. I had no more doubts, no more room for excuses. The outcome was ready, just waiting for the audience. He looked at me that night and asked, "Are you excited for tomorrow?" I smiled and replied, "Very." The sparkle in my eyes wasn't of anticipation for the party, but for his downfall. I was certain I would never forget that moment. The day dawned, and I prepared everything as usual: clothes, hair, makeup. From the outside, I looked like the same old wife. But inside, I was a woman armed, ready to expose the truth. I no longer carried pain, but determination. When we arrived, the whole family was gathered. Laughter, hugs, loud music. He seemed at ease, chatting, smiling. I watched every gesture, every word. His mask still held, but it was about to crumble. I sat at the table with some family members trying to act normal. My son played with his cousins, oblivious to what was about to happen. I breathed deeply, controlling my anxiety. The right moment was approaching, and I couldn't hesitate. During dinner, the godmother arrived. Impeccably dressed, smiling as always. She hugged everyone, including me. I returned a cold smile, but my eyes spoke volumes. She had no idea she was about to be exposed. As they chatted in the distance, I could already see the signs: discreet glances, knowing laughter, the same old act. Only this time, I wouldn't just be a spectator. I was ready to rip the curtain down. He approached, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Are you enjoying the party?" I stared at him for a few seconds. I smiled and replied, "Yes, it's great." Inside, it was as if I were counting the ticking of a clock. The moment was approaching. I grabbed my phone and opened the folder with the exam papers. My heart was racing, but my hand was steady. There was no turning back. I knew that in moments, his life would change forever. And mine too. During a toast, everyone raised their glasses. I took advantage of the collective attention to stand up as well. I looked at the family, took a deep breath, and said, "Before we toast, I want to share something important." Silence fell over the room. He looked at me confused, trying to understand. The godmother also stood still, unresponsive. I grabbed my phone, connected it to the TV in the reception room, and pressed play. The first image appeared. He and she entering the hotel, hand in hand. A buzz filled the room. Laughter faded, conversations ceased. Everyone stared at the screen in disbelief. He went pale, frozen, unable to move. The godmother lowered her head, embarrassed. The drama was over. My son, not fully understanding, looked at me and held my hand. I squeezed tightly as if to say, "Everything is under control." I wasn't shaking, I wasn't crying. I was calm amidst the chaos. He tried to speak, but his voice wouldn't come out. He only stammered, "It's not what it seems." The nervous laughter of the family echoed through the room. No one believed him. The evidence was too clear. He had nowhere to run. Some family members stood up, outraged. My sister-in-law screamed, "How could you do this to her? And to your own son?" The shame wasn't just mine anymore. Now it was his, and he felt every look of contempt like a punch. The godmother tried to sneak away but was stopped by harsh comments. People confronted her, calling her a liar, a coward. The ground seemed too small for her. No smile could hide what she'd done. I watched in silence. I didn't need to say much. The scene spoke for itself. He, who thought he was clever, who thought he had everything under control, was now just a small man in the face of his own lie. When the confusion subsided, I raised my voice. Years of trust destroyed, promises broken. And all this to someone who called himself part of the family. My voice echoed firmly, without tears. I didn't need drama. Reality was cruel enough. He tried to approach, to apologize, but I backed away. Don't touch me." The firmness of my voice silenced any attempt at speech. For the first time, he seemed truly powerless. His family members gathered around me, hugging me, supporting me. I felt the weight of years of pain being lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't happiness. It was relief. Finally, the truth was there for all to see. The godmother hurriedly left, trying to hide. He stayed behind, cowering, trying to justify the unjustifiable. But there were no more excuses. He had lost everything in a few minutes. I sat back, took a deep breath, and stared at the glass of wine in front of me. I thought about everything I'd endured in silence, all the sleepless nights. There, in that moment, I realized nothing had been in vain. The atmosphere at the party was no longer the same. People whispered, commented, exchanged glances. He became the center of attention, but not of admiration. It was contempt, pure disappointment. His mask was definitely broken. My son, still confused, asked softly, "Mom, what happens now?" I took a deep breath, stroked his head, and replied, "Now we're going to live the truth." Those words weren't just for him, they were for me too. As the night wore on, I felt a strength I hadn't remembered possessing. I had faced the truth head-on and shown it to the world. There was no longer room for fear. The worst had already happened, and I was still standing. I got up from the table, looked around, and said calmly, "Thank you for being here. Today, I needed to show something that was killing me silently. Now, I have nothing left to hide." And I sat back down, as if closing a chapter. He curled up, avoided my gaze. I knew the shame would consume him for a long time. But inside me something grew, the certainty that I had won. Not in the sense of pride, but of survival. I was free. And that morning, upon returning home, I lay in bed alone. The silence was heavy but also liberating. For the first time in a long time, I was able to close my eyes without fear. I knew the future wouldn't be easy. But I also knew the truth had given me back something I thought I'd lost, my own dignity. And no one could steal that from me again. Still, deep inside me, a nagging question remained. Because even after the exposure, I felt the story wasn't over yet. Something bigger was yet to come, and I needed to be ready. The day after the party, I woke with a heavy head, but with a sense of duty accomplished. He wasn't home anymore. He left early, without leaving a note, without sending a message. His silence spoke louder than any excuse I could come up with. I made coffee and sat at the table with my son. He didn't ask anything, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. Perhaps he didn't understand the gravity of it all, but I knew something had changed forever. I smiled at him, trying to reassure him. As I sipped my coffee, I remembered the scene from the previous night. The whole family stared at the TV, the godmother trying to hide her face, he pale and embarrassed. It replayed in my mind like a movie. I would never forget it. At work, the looks were different. News travels fast. A colleague approached and said, "You were brave." I smiled discreetly without comment. I didn't need applause. My courage wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. That afternoon he called me. His voice trembling, trying to remain calm. "We need to talk." I took a deep breath and replied, "We have nothing more to talk about." I hung up without giving him room to reply. For the first time, I was in control. He started sending me long messages, apologizing, begging for a chance. Words that no longer held any value. The man who had promised me fidelity was now begging me to forget the betrayal. But I wouldn't forget. I never would. In the following days, he tried to come home. He knocked on the door saying he wanted to explain. I didn't open it. The sound of the doorbell echoed like a reminder of everything I'd been through. My silence was my cruelest response. Some family members came to visit. My sister-in-law brought cake and words of support. "You did what many people would be afraid to do." I thanked them. Deep down, I knew it wasn't about courage, but about survival. I simply chose not to remain silent. My godmother, on the other hand, disappeared. She no longer showed up at events, didn't respond to anyone's messages. She became a ghost. But her absence was a reminder of the damage she left. She destroyed bonds that would never be rebuilt. My son began to watch me more closely. One day before bed, he said softly, "Mom, I saw you show me the video. I understand." My heart broke, but I replied, "The important thing is that we're together." He hugged me tightly. As the weeks passed, I realized the pain was giving way to a strange freedom. I no longer needed to fake smiles or make excuses. The silence of the house, once suffocating, was now a space to start over. A difficult start, but mine. He kept trying to contact me. Messages, flowers, even notes from friends. But nothing changed my decision. I knew that if I gave in, I would be signing my own sentence. I had already seen the truth too closely to turn back. I began to see myself through different eyes. Taking care of the house, my son, my life, without having to share it with someone who deceived me. I discovered a strength I never knew I had. And this discovery was more valuable than any broken promise. At the gym, during a Pilates class, I noticed how my body responded differently. Each breath was deeper, each movement firmer. I was no longer a hostage to pain. I was my own person. At the supermarket, some people whispered when they saw me. Stories spread, judgments too. But I didn't care. For the first time, I walked with my head held high. I wasn't the liar, I wasn't the traitor, I was the one who survived. One day, I ran into him on the street. He tried to approach me, but I kept my distance. His look was one of despair, mixed with regret. "Can we talk for 5 minutes?" he asked. I just shook my head and moved on. He didn't seem to accept the end. He sent long messages, trying to justify it, saying he regretted it, that it was a mistake. But each word only reinforced how right I was to walk away. There was no mistake. There was a choice. And he chose to betray me. With each passing day, my son seemed more mature. He'd ask things like, "Mom, are you going to be okay?" I'd smile and reply, "I'm fine now." It was for him that I needed to be firm. I wanted him to grow up knowing that the truth always wins. The nights were still long. Sometimes I'd lie down and cry quietly, silently. The pain doesn't disappear overnight. But each tear was different. They weren't tears of weakness, they were tears of healing. I started writing in a journal. Each page was an outpouring, a piece of my soul. Writing made me feel like I was organizing the chaos, and little by little this chaos transformed into strength. People praised me for my public exposure, but they didn't know the price I'd paid. Carrying the truth is heavy, it's not a victory, it's a scar. But I preferred the scar to the open wound. At least now I could breathe. One day while tidying my room, I found old photos of us. I saw smiles that I once believed were real. I looked at them for a few seconds and without hesitation threw them in the trash. I didn't want memories of a life that never really existed. At work, I received an unexpected promotion. The recognition for my effort came at a good time. It was as if life was showing me that I could, indeed, move forward. That there was something beyond the pain. At the gym, a colleague commented, "You're lighter, stronger." I smiled. She didn't know the weight I'd carried, but she could sense the change. I wasn't the same anymore. The pain transformed me into someone stronger, more self-aware. One night, while having dinner with my son, he said, "Mom, I'm proud of you." The tears came uncontrollably. He didn't know how much those words healed wounds. There, I realized nothing had been in vain. I was no longer afraid of being alone. I discovered that loneliness isn't absence. It's presence itself. And this discovery was more liberating than any relationship could offer me. Still, there was something that unsettled me. He wouldn't give up. With each failed attempt at getting closer, I felt he was preparing something. Something that could shake me again. And this feeling kept me alert. And that silent night, staring at the ceiling, I realized the story wasn't over yet. He wouldn't leave the scene so easily. And when he returned, I would need to be ready for the next confrontation. The weeks passed, and even after everything, he wouldn't give up. Messages, calls, notes left at the gate. It was as if he still believed I could forgive him. But there was no room for return. I no longer felt love, only repulsion. One afternoon, I found an envelope under the door. Inside, a long, handwritten letter. He talked about regret, about rebuilding the family, about giving it another chance. I read it to the end, took a deep breath, and threw it in the trash. Words don't erase actions. At work, I remained focused. My professional life became a safe haven. Each project delivered was a personal victory. I discovered, little by little, that there was a whole life beyond the weight of betrayal. But outside of work, the pressure continued. Some mutual friends tried to intercede. "He's sorry, you should listen." I responded only with silence. No one understood the gravity of what happened. It wasn't a mistake, it was an abyss. My son also felt the insistence. His father would look for him at school, wanting to take him for walks. I allowed it, but with clear limits. My son wasn't to blame for anything, but I needed to protect his innocence. Broken trust isn't easily repaired. One night the phone rang and I answered without looking. It was him, crying, saying he couldn't live without me. I remained silent, listening to every word. When he finished, I replied, "You should have thought of that before." And I hung up. His insistence began to bother me. It was almost suffocating. I felt like I was being watched, even in my own home. I started locking doors and windows more carefully. His lie had already gone from intimate to invasive. Meanwhile, the godmother remained missing. No messages, no contact. Perhaps she was trying to start over, far from shame. But her silence was also revealing. Cowardice always chooses the easiest path, disappearing. A friend invited me out to dinner. At the restaurant, we laughed, talked, and for a few hours I forgot the pain. But when I returned home, there he was, standing in the car out front. I waited until he left. The discomfort grew. I talked to my son about security. I told him that if he saw his father prowling the house, he should let me know. He listened seriously, understanding every word. It wasn't fair to involve him in this, but it was necessary. I couldn't risk it. The next day, I found flowers on the doorstep, an expensive bouquet accompanied by a note, "Forever, us." I immediately threw it in the trash. I wanted nothing from him. It no longer made me miss him, only angry. I began to reflect more on my life. How much time had I wasted believing empty promises? How much had I sacrificed to sustain a marriage that only existed for others? The betrayal hurt, but it also woke me up. And waking up hurt more than any lie. At work, I gained even more prominence. A colleague said to me, "You seem stronger now." I smiled. She didn't know the price of this strength. It wasn't courage, it was necessity. When life tears you apart, you learn to walk on the wreckage. One night, the phone rang again. It was him, but this time the voice was different. Cold, almost threatening. "You're destroying my life." I took a deep breath and replied, "I just showed you who you are," and I hung up, my hands trembling. This change in his tone alerted me. It wasn't just regret anymore. It was anger. It was the pain of a wounded ego. I knew I needed to be prepared. When a man loses his mask, what's left can be even more dangerous. I talked to my sister-in-law about it. She said, "If you need to, stay at my place for a few days." I thanked her, but declined. My home was my territory. I wouldn't leave my space because of him. He was the one who had to retreat, not me. That night, I locked all the doors and windows. I remained silent, listening for any noise. The fear returned, but with it came determination. I was no longer the naive woman I once was. I knew that, if necessary, I would face it. My son, before bed, asked, "Mom, does Dad still like his godmother?" I swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and said, "The important thing is that you and I are together." He smiled, but deep down I knew that this question revealed the scar he also carried. Time passed and I tried to move on with my life. The gym, work, small get-togethers with friends. I was slowly rebuilding myself. But around every corner, there was always the feeling he was nearby, watching. One afternoon, on my way back from the market, I noticed a car following me for a few streets. My heart raced. I glanced in the rearview mirror. It was him. I quickened my pace, quickly entered my house, and locked the door. The obsession was no longer just annoying, it was frightening. I decided I needed to act. I gathered all the evidence again, not only of the betrayal, but also of his insistence. Messages, calls, bouquets, parked cars. I put together a new dossier. This time it wasn't for the family. It was for something bigger. I went to the police station and filed a report. It wasn't just betrayal. Now it was stalking. I told the officer everything, and he listened attentively. I left feeling a little lighter. I wasn't alone. In the following days, he continued trying to contact me. But now I had support. Every call was recorded, every unwanted visit was noted. I was no longer a voiceless victim. I had a voice, and it was echoing in the right places. The strangest thing was how he still tried to justify himself. "I just want my family back." But families aren't rebuilt on broken pieces. He didn't understand that, or pretended not to. What he wanted was the power he no longer had over me. My son watched me more intently. He began saying things like, "Mom, you're brave." I smiled and replied, "I only do what's right." Deep down, I knew I was teaching him an important lesson. Never settle for less than you deserve. Little by little, fear gave way to another feeling: security. Not because he'd given up, but because I knew that, whatever happened, I was ready. I'd already faced the worst. Whatever came next would just be a consequence. And one silent night, as I closed my eyes, I realized something. The story wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about power, about control, about survival. He hadn't given up yet, but neither had I. And when the final showdown came, only one of us would emerge whole. The nights began to grow even heavier. I lay down, closed my eyes, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me alone. Every noise in the street, every rustle of the wind felt like a warning. I was no longer truly resting. My son, without realizing it, began sleeping in my bed more often. He said he had nightmares, but I knew it was fear. Children sense the weather. And that tense atmosphere was already pervading the house. One afternoon, as I was leaving the gym, I saw his car parked a few feet from the door. He pretended to be fiddling with his phone, but his gaze followed my every step. I took a deep breath, got in my car, and left without looking back. But inside, a knot tightened. At work, my boss noticed my fatigue. "You need rest," she said. I smiled but didn't tell her. It wasn't simple, it wasn't just exhaustion. It was the combination of pain, vigilance, and a constant fear that followed me like a shadow. The flowers kept arriving. Sometimes at the gate, sometimes at the reception desk. Always accompanied by notes: "It's still us. You'll remember what we had." I no longer kept any, they went straight to the trash. But every gesture was a reminder of the obsession. My sister-in-law called me every day to check on me. She knew he wouldn't give up easily. "Don't trust his silence," she warned. I agreed. Silence sometimes is more dangerous than screams. One night I heard footsteps in the backyard. My heart leaped into my throat. I grabbed my cell phone and called the police. When they arrived, they found nothing but marks in the grass. But I knew someone had been there. The fear was now palpable. I decided to install security cameras throughout the house, electronic eyes that gave me some peace of mind. I watched the videos in real time on my cell phone. Every movement was recorded. Technology, previously used by him to deceive me, was now my ally. My son started asking more about his father. "Is he coming back to live here?" I swallowed hard and said, "No, son. It's just the two of us now." I saw the sadness in his eyes, but also the trust. He understood that the truth was harsh but necessary. One morning I found a note stuck to my car's windshield. The handwriting was his. "You can't run from me forever." My legs trembled, but I took a deep breath. I wasn't the same woman I'd been before. I knew I had to see it through. I took the note to the police station. The officer listened attentively and reinforced the importance of recording everything. "This is proof," he said. For the first time, I felt someone by my side, ready to transform that pain into justice. Despite the fear, I maintained my routine: work, the gym, the grocery store, my son's school. But now, every step was calculated. I never let my guard down. My life became an invisible battlefield. At the grocery store once, I felt someone watching me. I looked back. Nothing. But the feeling remained. I hurriedly grabbed my groceries and returned home. It was like living on high alert, without rest, without pause. That night, I told my sister-in-law that I was thinking of moving. Maybe it would be better to start over somewhere else. But she replied firmly, "Don't give him the power to push you out of your own life." Her words resonated deeply. I had to resist. Time seemed to drag on, each day a battle. He kept appearing, sometimes from afar, sometimes up close. I feigned indifference, but my heart raced. The tension was constant, as if something about to explode surrounded me. My son, through it all, became my strength. He made me laugh, reminded me that there was life beyond the pain. In the darkest moments, he was the reminder that I couldn't give up. One day I received an anonymous message. "If I can't have you, no one will." My hands shook as I read it. It was clear it was him. I took it straight to the police. Now it wasn't just stalking. It was a threat. And I needed to be ready for whatever came. I spoke to the police chief about protective measures. He explained the steps, and I followed each one. It wasn't just an emotional game anymore. It was a matter of safety. I needed to protect myself and my son. Even so, at night, as I lay in bed, I wondered, how had a man who shared years of my life become this? How had someone who promised eternal love now threatened me? The betrayal had opened wounds, but his obsession had left even deeper scars. I began reaching out to trusted neighbors. I asked them to watch for any strange movements. They accepted without hesitation. The support network became essential. I no longer faced everything alone. One Sunday afternoon, I saw his car drive slowly past my house. He didn't stop, but he slowed down enough for me to feel the weight of his gaze. My heart raced, but this time I didn't flinch. I stood at the window, staring back. It was like a silent war. I knew he wouldn't give up. But I also knew I wouldn't bow down, not anymore. With each act of persecution, my anger grew. And with it, the certainty that justice had to be served. My son, seeing me so serious, asked, "Mom, are you afraid of Dad?" I took a deep breath and replied, "I'm not afraid. I'm careful." He smiled, satisfied. I knew I needed to reassure him, even as fear still lingered within me. I received an unexpected call from the school. He had tried to pick up my son without my permission. The principal stopped him. My blood ran cold. The fine line between persecution and real danger was blurring. I ran to the school, hugged my son, and promised nothing would happen. Inside, my heart was breaking. Now it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting what I loved most. The following nights were even more tense. I slept with my cell phone next to me, ready for any emergency. Cameras recorded everything. The sound of the wind was no longer just wind. It was suspicion. It was fear. I knew the final confrontation was near. He wouldn't accept the end. And I wouldn't accept living under threat anymore. It was inevitable. Soon, our lives would collide again, and this time it wouldn't be in silence. And one silent morning, watching my son get ready for school, I realized there was no choice. I would have to face it head-on, no matter what. The story was about to reach its most dangerous point. That morning, the air was heavy. I made coffee and set the table, but my hands were shaking slightly. My son noticed and asked, "Mom, is everything okay?" I smiled, but the truth was, my body knew. Something important was about to happen. As I walked him to school, I noticed his car parked on the corner. He wasn't moving, just watching me. I took a deep breath, kissed my son, and said, "Don't worry, I'm here." But inside, my heart was beating like a drum. When I returned home, I found another note on the door. "You can't run away from me. This time I wasn't afraid." I felt anger. I went inside, slammed the door shut, and stared at the note. His obsession had gone too far. I sat on the couch, took a deep breath, and began to reflect on everything. How many women live this in silence? How many people swallow betrayal, persecution, and threats, believing they have to endure? I didn't want to be one of them. I wanted to break the cycle. I called the police station and reported the note. I explained that the fear had become an invasion, that it wasn't just an inconvenience, but a risk. The officer reassured me and said he would reinforce the protective order. For the first time, I felt someone truly listen to me. That night, I sat with my journal and wrote, "Today I chose not to be a victim. Today I decided that my life will not be defined by a man's betrayal." Each word I wrote was a relief, as if I were returning weight to the paper. My son brought me a drawing he'd done at school, the two of us holding hands, smiling. He wrote, "Mommy and I are strong." Tears fell, unstoppable. He had no idea how much that sustained me. At work, I received compliments on my performance. "You're stronger, more confident," they said. I smiled on the outside, but inside I knew it wasn't security. It was survival. I only learned to toughen up because life forced me to. I began discreetly helping other women in my circle. When someone commented on distrust, I'd say, "Listen to your intuition, never ignore it." I didn't tell my whole story, but I made it clear. Intuition never lies. The days passed and I realized I no longer cried. The wound was still there, but it was healing. Each morning when I looked in the mirror, I saw less pain and more strength. I was relearning how to live. He, on the other hand, disappeared for a few days. No note, no message, no car around the corner. The silence unsettled me, but it also gave me respite. I knew it wasn't the end, but I took the opportunity to breathe. I used this time to take care of myself. I went back to walking in the park, bought new clothes, and allowed myself to smile again. I discovered there was life outside his shadow. And this discovery was my greatest victory. but deep down I knew he hadn't given up. Men who lose control rarely accept the end. I prepared for his return, but this time not with fear. I was ready to face him. I began to reflect on everything I'd learned. I discovered that fidelity isn't about pretty words, but about actions. I discovered that love can't survive where there are lies. And I discovered, above all, that silence can be stronger than any scream. One night, before going to sleep, I watched my son breathe peacefully beside me. I thought about how his life had changed too, even without understanding everything. The betrayal affected not only me, but the entire structure he knew as a family. This made me reflect even more. How many women accept staying in relationships like this, believing they're protecting their children? When in reality, they're teaching them to normalize lies, cowardice, and emotional violence. I knew my choice to expose everything wasn't just about me. It was about showing my son that the truth must always prevail, even when it hurts. It was about teaching him that dignity is priceless. As the weeks passed, I realized that the pain of betrayal no longer defined me. I was no longer the cheated wife. I was the woman who chose not to remain silent, who faced it, who survived. That was the identity I wanted to carry. The messages of support kept coming. Women who heard my story said, "I've been through that. You gave me courage." I realized that my pain was somehow helping others get up too. In a conversation with my sister-in-law, she said, "You turned a fall into an example." Those words stuck in my mind. That was it. I couldn't erase what happened, but I could give it new meaning. My fall became strength. Still, there were nights when I woke up with a start, remembering the notes, the chases, the footsteps in the backyard. The body stores memories. But instead of paralyzing me, these flashes reminded me of how much I resisted. I started to look at the future with different eyes. I didn't know if I would find another love, but that was no longer a priority. What I wanted was peace, security, truth. The rest would come in due time. I started asking myself, and if it were you, what would I do? This question guided me. Because many women still live in silence, afraid of breaking up. I wanted to be proof that breaking up is possible. I also asked myself, how many will still ignore the signs? I ignored it myself for a long time. The excuses, the delays, the averted looks. Intuition screamed, but I chose to believe the lie. Never again. And the last question, the toughest, would you tell anyone or keep it to yourself? I counted. And in telling, I found support, release, and a way back to myself. Silence is an accomplice to pain. The truth is, liberation. That night, I slammed the diary shut and took a deep breath. My heart felt lighter, as if I could finally rest. Not because the story is over, but because I chose to close the chapter within myself. I lay down next to my son and fell asleep peacefully. For the first time in a long time, without fear, without anxiety. Only with the certainty that I had won the most difficult battle, not against him, but against the silence that consumed me. And when I closed my eyes, a certainty settled in me. My story is not one of defeat. It is about resistance, courage, and a fresh start. And no one can ever erase that.